Many thanks to the conference organizers for organizing this very important day on Parental Alienation Awareness Day. Those of us who've lived through and studied parental alienation appreciate all too well the importance of Parental Alienation Awareness Day to draw attention to this highly neglected and misunderstood form of child abuse and also domestic violence. I've been studying this phenomenon, as I mentioned, since 1985, although at that time the term parental alienation was not yet in use and the idea was far too controversial. So I used a more neutral language of parental disengagement from children's lives. The fact that I referred to it or identified it as involuntary disengagement in most cases was met with a lot of resistance from those who insisted that it's always entirely voluntary if fathers or mothers lose contact. We do live in a parent-blaming society, and we're quick to judge parents who've lost contact with their children in particular, judge them in a very negative way. Today, parental alienation as a form of emotional abuse of children is at exactly the same level of public and professional awareness as child physical and sexual abuse was about a century ago. At that time, those few people who were advocating for the recognition of child physical abuse could only find allies for their cause of child protection within the Society of Prevention of Cruelty to Animals. And in fact, child abuse intervention began as a subset of animal cruelty prevention. That's just how unaware people were of the issue. There was widespread denial and opposition to the concept of child physical abuse. We see the same type of lack of awareness, denial, and opposition to parental alienation as a form of child abuse today. I would submit to you that parental alienation is an extreme form of child abuse, and because of this, we shouldn't allow the challenges involved in proving emotional abuse of children to deter us from intervening in these cases. Parental alienation is a child protection matter. Yet in Canada, I can say that emotional abuse is rarely even investigated by child protection authorities. It's simply assumed to be impossible to prove, and child protection authorities wash their hands of the matter. Parental alienation is ignored by professional child and family practitioners very often. The parents of alienated children, on the other hand, are acutely aware of the devastating effects of parental alienation on their own children, and yet they're powerless to act to protect their own children. Every day I hear the heart-rending yet muted pleas of parents desperate for help for their children. Their voices largely have fallen on deaf ears. These aren't parents who are agitating for their rights. They're more silent voices, muted voices of those who suffer in quiet desperation, who are prevented from helping their own children. As we're now witnessing, and a few researchers have actually used the term suicide epidemic of such parents, tied directly to family court judgments that remove these loving parents from their children's lives. And we turn a blind eye to the suffering of their children. So thank you, Iceland, for holding this event. It's interesting and significant that the first country on earth to legislate equal pay for women is hosting this important gathering on parental alienation as a form of child abuse. It's interesting and significant because equal pay for women is the first of two key reforms necessary as a form of prevention and intervention to deal most effectively, I believe, with parental alienation. In Iceland, as in other parts of the Western world, the father as breadwinner model has given way to both mothers and fathers working outside the home and to parents sharing responsibility for caring of their children. It's no longer viable or tenable that within such family structures a wage gap between women and men should exist. With mothers and fathers working outside the home, we should strive for an equal standard of living. In the two homes, when parents separate, equal pay for women makes this possible. And of course, a major impetus for parental alienation is the financial incentive for a parent to hold on to one's child and exclude the other in the child's life, the incentive of child support payments. With equal pay for women, given that mothers are working outside of the home to more or less the same extent as fathers, the notion of fostering and continuing women's financial dependency on men via child support, especially in shared parenting households, becomes outdated. If women's financial situation is on par with men's, we can dispense with the continuation of women's economic dependence on men via child support. And when we remove child support as an incentive for withholding one's child from the other parent, parental alienation is much less of a problem. In addition to equal pay for women, the second key reform necessary for true gender equality and as a form of prevention and intervention to deal with parental alienation is a legal presumption of equal shared parenting responsibility. Just as we promote equal pay for women and of course we're also promoting shared parental responsibility for children in two-parent households, so it's vital for children's well-being to promote the maximum involvement of each parent in children's lives after parental separation. Equal parental responsibility. It's especially critical in the context where both parents shared in the caregiving of children before separation, which today can be said applies to the majority of families with children. Parental alienation is much less of an issue when there's a legal standard of equal parenting, as neither parent is threatened by the potential loss of his or her children, and does not have to mount a campaign of denigration of the other parent to prove in court that they're better suited to be the custodial or residential parent. On the other hand, you see kind of my agenda. Is parental alienation a form of child abuse? The effects of parental alienation on children. Parental alienation is a form of individual abuse and the implications in regard to child protection practice. And then parental alienation is a form of collective child abuse, and looking at some of the implications for family law reform. I'd like to begin by addressing the question then, is parental alienation in fact a form of child abuse? First of all, it's important to distinguish between parental alienation as a form of unjustified parental rejection by a child and justified parental rejection. Parental alienation does not refer to those cases where a child or parent has been victimized by child abuse or family violence, and the child is fearful of the parent as a result. Note that even the most physically abused children rarely reject an abusive parent with the vehemence of alienated children. This is a quote from Linda Gottlieb. Despite the abuse and neglect suffered by the 3,000 foster care children who had been under my care, it was extremely uncommon for those children to refuse contact with a parent, even with an overly abusive parent. Rather, abused children tend to protect and cling to the abusive parent. Moreover, in the rare cases in which that did appear to happen, there was always some evidence of indoctrination or programming, typically by foster parents who had the surreptitious goal of adopting the child. Thus, it is counter-instinctual for a child to reject a parent, even an abusive parent. When a professional observes a child strongly reject a parent in the absence of verified abuse, neglect, or markedly deficient parenting skills, which should never be assumed based on the child's self-reporting, one of the first thoughts should be that the other parent is an alienator. Moreover, one should never assume that because a child has rejected a parent, the parent must have done something to warrant it. Having observed thousands of genuinely abused children during a period of 24 years, I've concluded that a child's innate desire to have a relationship with his or her parents is one of the most powerful of human instincts, surpassed only by the instinct for survival and the instinct to protect one's young. Among normal children, in the absence of alienating influence, that instinct is seldom suppressed because a parent exhibits relatively minor flaws, deficiencies, or idiosyncrasies. The research of my colleague, Jennifer, who you'll hear from in a few minutes, tells us that parental alienation is far more common than previously believed. It's also much more debilitating for both children and parents than is commonly assumed. And now, with over 500 scientific articles and many books on the subject, we've achieved a degree of scientific consensus on the reality and effects of parental alienation. Given this research knowledge, I'd suggest that the need for effective treatment programs, particularly parental alienation reunification programs, is urgently needed. And because shared parenting is preventive of parental alienation, family law reform is also urgently needed. So is parental alienation a form of child abuse? To answer this, I think we have to start with the question or the issue of defining child abuse and determine whether parental alienation fits within that definition. Child abuse itself is a highly contested and contentious notion, but there is consensus that child abuse is a specific form of harm to children with two core elements. First, it is a significant form of harm. Child abuse poses a serious threat to the welfare and well-being of the child. In order for us to classify it as a form of abuse, this significant harm must be unambiguous and precisely defined. Second, the source of the abuse is attributable to human agency. It's the result of human action. This action may be either at the hands of an individual caregiver and/or a form of collective action. For example, social, legal, political, and economic factors that directly harm children. Thus, the two most commonly accepted general definitions of child abuse include these two core elements, those by Cooper and Finkelhor-Corbin. So as a form of child abuse, parental alienation contains these two basic features. First, it's a significant form of harm to children, and second, its occurrence is attributable to human action. These are the two core elements in the very definition. At first aspect, parental alienation involves a set of abusive strategies on the part of a parent to foster a child's rejection of the other parent, whereby children are manipulated by one parent to hate the other. It involves the programming of a child by one parent to denigrate the alienated or so-called targeted parent in an effort to undermine and interfere with the child's relationship with that parent. That denigration results in the child's emotional rejection of the targeted parent and the loss of a capable and loving parent from the life of the child. The tactics of alienating parent thus are tantamount to extreme psychological maltreatment of children, including spurning, terrorizing, isolating, exploiting, denying emotional responsiveness. So the first defining feature of parental alienation as a form of child abuse is the behavior of the alienator. There are several theories in regard to the etiology of parental alienation. I guess probably the most common theory is that it's simply a matter of an inflated sense of entitlement, an addiction to power over. Hatred of and desire to hurt the other parent is stronger than the parent's love for the child. The need for revenge supersedes the child's need for both parents. Another theory is that the behavior is a sign of the parent's inability to let go, to separate from the couple conflict and focus on the needs of the child. The parent's hatred toward the other parent overrides their love for the child. A third sort of theory is parental alienation being born in complex trauma from the childhood of the alienating parent, and the alienation process is a means of transferring onto the targeted parent that experience of complex trauma. And a fourth theory is that the foundation of parental alienation is really a lack of empathy and understanding of the child's needs and perceptions on the part of the parent. But regardless of the causes, parental alienation is the result of human action. And in a sense, detection of parental alienation thus is a relatively straightforward matter. I believe firmly that in regard to parental alienation, by their actions you will be able to recognize an alienator. In the video we heard, made reference to the research of Amy Baker, who's identified 17 parental alienation strategies used by alienating parents. I won't go through them, but here's the list of 17 strategies based on research on adult children who lived through parental alienation. And of course, this has kind of been replicated in several studies of Amy Baker's, again, reflecting the perspective of people who've lived through parental alienation as children and are now adults. Each of these strategies serve to, again, further the child's cohesion and alignment with the alienating parent on the one hand. Secondly, create psychological distance between the child and the targeted parent. They intensify the targeted parent's own anger and hurt over the child's behavior. And finally, incite conflict between the child and the target parent, should the target parent challenge or react to the child's behavior. And parents who try to alienate their child from the other parent convey a three-part message. I think Hamir mentioned this in the video. I am the only parent who loves you, and you need me to feel good about yourself. The other parent is dangerous and unavailable. And finally, pursuing a relationship with that parent jeopardizes your relationship with me. It's important to note that parental alienation exists along a continuum from mild to severe. In my view, these 17 strategies really are only a partial list, as Baker's work is focused on alienated parents, most of whom at least have had some ongoing contact with their children, however minimal. My own research on alienated fathers and mothers is focused on the more severe cases of parents who are completely denied contact with their children. In my research on severely alienated parents, a few other indicators of parental alienation kind of emerged from the research. Again, this is now a slightly different perspective, the perspective of parents themselves. And they came up with kind of 12 core themes. First and foremost is just simply denial of any kind of relationship. Access denial, to the point where the parent loses all contact. It's basically seizing the child by force, which is actually a definition of rape. The misuse of the legal system to undermine the other parent's participation in the child's life, and to entirely remove the parent from the child's life. Second factor was the alienating parent's belief in her or his entitlement as the primary or sole parental figure in the child's life, a lack of validation or even recognition of the salience of the other parent as a parent. Thirdly, insensitivity to and disregard for the impact of one's behavior on the children, a lack of empathy and attunement to the children's needs, a willingness to engage in conflict in front of the child, a lack of emotional depth and emotional responsiveness in one's own relationship with one's child, parentification of one's child, the child made to feel responsible for the parent's well-being. Fourth factor is overt or covert obsession with the other parent, and with hurting that other parent to the extent that the obsession prevails over one's parental responsibilities. Fifth is a willingness and enthusiasm to engage in adversarial combat and skill in the adversarial arena, a readiness to engage in and risk a winner-take-all process. A sixth is a refusal to communicate or engage in a negotiation process, either directly or with third-party intervention such as family mediation, a lack of good faith in any involvement in such processes. Seventh factor is refusal to accept responsibility for one's own contribution to the problem, situation, or conflict, an insistence on being right in all matters or disagreements with the former spouse, a lack of accountability in regard to the problem, situation, or conflict. An eighth factor is readiness to accuse the other party of wrongdoing, quick to blame and place responsibility for the problem situation onto the other parent. 9 is a lack of guilt or remorse for one's behavior, any regret over one's actions. 10th is exaggeration and outright lying, dishonesty, and an attitude at the end justifies the means. And then, as Amy Baker outlined, bad-mouthing of the other parent in front of the child, or alternatively, avoiding any mention of the other parent in an attempt to erase that parent from the child's memory. And finally, constant monitoring and questioning the child in regard to the child's relationship with the other parent. So that's sort of the first part of the definition of parental alienation and also the definition of child abuse. The second element of the definition of parental alienation relates to the profoundly harmful effects on the child. The primary manifestation of parental alienation is the child's unjustified campaign of denigration against the parent, in which the child's views of the target parent are almost exclusively negative, to the point that the parent is demonized and seen as evil. For the child, parental alienation constitutes a serious mental condition based on this false belief that the alienated parent is dangerous and unworthy. In the most severe cases, the effects on children are profound. In these extreme situations, children lose the capacity to give and accept love from a parent. They're manipulated to hate the target parent, despite children's innate desire to love and be loved by both parents. Their denigration results in their own emotional rejection of the parent and the loss of a capable and loving parent from the life of the child. We now know that such emotional abuse is just as debilitating, as severe as physical or sexual abuse of children. We know, for example, that children witnessing the abuse of a parent, which is essentially what's happening in situations of parental alienation, is a particularly harmful form of child abuse. And just as witnessing the abuse of a parent is a very serious form of child abuse, so witnessing the abuse of one's own child, which is what's happening in parental alienation, is a very serious form of domestic violence. So the severe effects of parental alienation on children are well documented, and include low self-esteem and self-hatred, depression, social isolation, poor academic performance, substance abuse, other forms of addiction, and self-harm. This first point, self-hatred, particularly disturbing among affected children, one of the more serious effects of parental alienation. And is common in situations of parental alienation. Teaching hatred of the other parent is tantamount to instilling self-hatred in a child. Children internalize the hatred targeted toward the alienated parent. They're led to believe the alienated parent didn't love or want them, and experience severe guilt in betraying the alienated parent. Their self-hatred and depression is rooted in feelings of being unloved by one or both of their parents, from separation from that parent, while being denied the opportunity to mourn the loss of that parent or even talk about the parent. It's not an emotion, hatred is not an emotion that comes naturally to a child. It has to be taught. A parent who teach a child to hate or fear another parent, the other parent, represents a grave and persistent danger to the mental and emotional health of that child. Parental alienation makes children feel worthless, flawed, unloved, unwanted, endangered, and only of value in meeting another's needs. Secondly, alienated children exhibit severe psychosocial disturbances. These include disrupted social emotional development, lack of trust in relationships, severe anxiety, and social isolation. They have poor relationship with both their peers and with both of their parents. As adults, they tend to enter partnerships earlier, are more likely to divorce or dissolve their cohabiting unions, and are more likely to have children outside any partnership, and are more likely to become alienated from their own children. A third feature is low self-sufficiency, a lack of autonomy, lingering dependence on the alienating parent. They're more likely to play truant from school and leave school at an early age. They're less likely to attain academic and professional qualifications in adulthood, more likely to experience unemployment, have low incomes, remain on social assistance. They seem to drift aimlessly through life. And finally, alienated children experience difficulties controlling their impulses. They struggle with addiction and self-harm, more likely to smoke, drink alcohol, abuse drugs, as well as to succumb to behavioral addictions, more likely to be promiscuous, foregoing contraception, and becoming teenage parents. Of the 4 different types of abuse, that is physical, sexual, and emotional abuse and neglect, Parental alienation is usually considered to be a form of severe emotional or psychological abuse, but it doesn't co-occur with the three other types of child abuse. Co-occurs with the neglect, because alienating parents' hatred of the target parent is stronger than their love for their child. They're less attuned to and thus neglect the needs of the child. Co-occurs with physical and sexual abuse, because children in situations where one parent is absent from their lives are at significantly greater risk than children who have meaningful relationships with both parents. We know from the research that alienated children are 5 times more likely to have experienced physical abuse and emotional maltreatment, and are exposed to 100 times higher risk of fatal abuse. They have a higher risk of physical health problems, psychosomatic health symptoms, and illness such as acute and chronic pain, diabetes, asthma, headaches, stomach aches, and feeling sick. They run greater mortality and morbidity risks. They're more likely to die as children. They live an average of 4 years less over their lifespan. They're more likely to experience problems with sexual health and contracting sexually transmitted infections. And finally, the Journal of Ethnology and Sociobiology recently reported that preschoolers who were alienated from one of their parents are 40 times more likely to be sexually abused. Regardless of the growing body of research, there's still controversy surrounding parental alienation. However, parental alienation specialists agree that parental alienation is a particularly egregious form of child abuse, and that's reflected in the wide body of research that's accumulated over the past 10 years especially. But yet, despite this emerging consensus among the specialists in the area that parental alienation fits exactly the definition of child abuse, that there's substantial empirical evidence in regard to prevalence and effects, there's still a lot of professional misunderstanding. It's been said, again, as I've mentioned, that in regard to parental alienation, denial of this form of abuse is reminiscent of denial of physical and sexual abuse of children a century ago. So the prevalence of such denial and misunderstanding has prompted surveys in the legal and mental health fields of child and family practitioners that are specializing in the area of children affected by divorce. Can children reject a parent whose behavior does not warrant rejection? Is it possible? And if the answer is yes, can this rejection be due to an influence of an alienating parent? So a survey taken at the Association of Family and Conciliation Courts annual conference, this is back in 2014, reported 98% agreement in support of the basic tenet of parental alienation. Children can be manipulated by one parent to reject the other parent who does not deserve to be rejected. Parental alienation is an extreme manifestation of 3 disorders identified in the DSM-5, parent-child relational problem, child affected by parental relationship distress, and child psychological abuse. The category parent-child relational problem involves 2 symptom clusters in the DSM: impaired functioning in behavioral, cognitive, or affective domains, and negative attributions of the other's intentions, hostility toward or scapegoating of the other, and unwarranted feelings of estrangement on the part of the child. So the concept of parental alienation, even though the term parental alienation is never used in the DSM-5, the concept is actually there. Parental alienation is in the current draft of the ICD-11, the World Health Organization's International Classification of Diseases, with a specific definition of parental alienation contained in that document. So what should we do about parental alienation as a form of child abuse? First, recognize it as a form of individual child abuse that requires a child protection response. Every child has a fundamental right and need for an unthreatened and loving relationship with both parents, and to be denied that right by one parent without sufficient justification, such as abuse or neglect, is a form of child abuse. Alienated children are no less damaged than other child victims of extreme conflict, like child soldiers or abducted children, who identify with their tormentors to avoid pain and maintain a relationship with them, however abusive the relationship is. Parental alienation is a serious form of emotional child abuse, which is strongly linked to child neglect, and physical and sexual abuse clearly makes it, above all else, a child protection concern. So the first step in combating parental alienation is the recognition by child protection authorities of parental alienation as a form of individual child abuse that it warrants a child protection response. However, parental alienation as a form of child abuse is not only the result of individual actions by a parent, but its source is also found in social, legal, political, and economic policies. It's thus a form of collective child abuse. It flourishes in situations, for example, where one parent has exclusive care and control of children, and legal systems that remove a parent from a child's life via primary residence orders. These aren't just contributing to parental alienation, they're engaging in parental alienation when a parent is effectively removed from a child's life. Because that's what happens in kind of legal determinations where primary residence will be with one parent only, and lack of legal recognition of both parents as salient in the child's life. You're removing a parent, not granting custody or granting residence. So parents in court are set up to fight in an effort to win primary residence or custody of their children, and the system tends to reward, this is particularly the case in North America, the system tends to reward people skilled in adversarial combat. Parents often win their case by disparaging the other parent as a parent, in effect engaging in alienating behaviors, and the system encourages thereby and produces alienating behavior. Parental alienation is much more likely to occur in those legal jurisdictions where child residence is granted to one parent only, and least likely to occur in jurisdictions which have legislated a presumption of equal parenting and recognize both equal decision-making and equal caregiving of children. Equal shared parenting law and legal sanctioning of the fact that children of two primary parents is a bulwark against parental alienation. It's no great mystery about parental alienation. If we legally sanction it within an adversarial forum, parents will abuse the system and abuse the other parent. It's in the context of legally determined primary residence that parental alienation becomes a serious problem for children. So the second step in combating parental alienation as a form of collective child abuse is a fundamental reform of the family law system, specifically a rebuttable legal presumption of equal parenting responsibility and equal decision-making as an alternative to the current adversarial model. So I'll end my presentation with a proposal for addressing the problem of parental alienation. In Iceland, as anywhere else, I propose a four-pillar framework for addressing parental alienation. I see each of these four pillars as essential in any campaign to combat parental alienation as a form of child abuse. I've already mentioned the first two pillars, which are the most important. The harm reduction pillar, addressing parental alienation as a form of child abuse and as a child protection matter. Secondly, prevention pillar, a rebuttable legal presumption of equal parenting responsibility in contested legal cases when parents are in conflict over the post-separation living arrangements of their children. Treatment is the third pillar. And of course, intervention in cases of parental alienation is a highly sensitive matter. Alienated children seem to have a secret wish for someone to call their bluff, someone to almost compel them to reconnect with the parent that they claim to hate. Despite their strongly stated positions of alignment, alienated children want nothing more than to be given the permission and freedom to love and be loved by both parents. And we've seen this from the research that many alienated children transform quickly from refusing or staunchly resisting the rejected parent to being able to show and receive love from that parent, followed by an equally rapid shift back to the alienated position when they're back in the orbit of the alienating parent. So while children's stated wishes regarding parenting arrangements in contested cases should be considered, they shouldn't be determinative in cases of parental alienation, because there's a disconnect between what children say they want and what they truly desire. Reunification efforts should be undertaken with service providers with specialized expertise in parental alienation reunification. There are a number of models out there that have been developed, the best known being Richard Warshak's Family Bridges program, an educative and experiential program focused on allowing the child to have a healthy relationship with both parents, removing the child from the parental conflict, encouraging child autonomy, multiple perspective taking, and critical thinking. The second model is Sullivan's Overcoming Barriers Family Camp, which combines psychoeducational and clinical intervention within an environment of milieu therapy that's aimed toward the development of an agreement regarding the sharing of parenting time and a written aftercare plan. Friedlander and Walter's multimodal family intervention provides differential interventions for situations of parental alignment, alienation, enmeshment, and estrangement, different interventions at different points of that alienation continuum. All of these programs emphasize the clinical significance of children coming to regard their parents as equally valued and important in their lives, while at the same time helping enmeshed children relinquish their protective role toward their alienating parents. I hear daily, and I've heard from so many alienated parents, both mothers and fathers. This is not a father's issue. The latest research indicates that mothers are just as much at risk of alienation as fathers. The main messages I give people are, first of all, never ever give up. Secondly, maintain your integrity and take the high road. Don't sort of lower yourself to that kind of counter-alienation position. And in the face of hostility and rejection from your children, always respond with loving compassion, being there for your child. It's the best response you can provide your children, even in the face of the sad truth that all of these efforts may not be enough to bring back your child. I agree with Richard Warshak that wherever possible, alienated parents should try to expose their children to people who regard them, as the parents, with honor and respect, to let children see that their negative opinion and the negative opinion of the alienating parent is not shared by the rest of the world. This type of experience will leave a much stronger impression than anything the alienated parent can say on his or her own behalf. Finally, we have the enforcement pillar. There is a role for the judicial system to play, even with a legal presumption of equal parenting, and that is the enforcement of parenting orders, shared parenting orders. However, as I mentioned before, enforcement is made easier when neither parent is threatened by the potential loss of his or her children within an equal parenting legislation. And enforcement of equal parenting orders is much easier than the law enforcement nightmare we have in North America when one parent is effectively removed via a primary residence order. The judicial system also has an important role to play in situations of family violence. In such cases, a rebuttable presumption against equal parenting should apply. So in conclusion, for parental alienation to be recognized and accepted as on par with other forms of serious child maltreatment, a clear and precise definition of the phenomenon of parental alienation is needed. The exact nature of the harms befalling children as a result of parental alienation should be unambiguous, and I believe we are now at that point. The current state of knowledge is such that we have a clear and precise definition of what it is, and the effects of parental alienation on children are well documented. Again, child abuse is a specific form of harm to children with two elements. First, it's a significant form of harm to children, and second, its occurrence is attributed to human agency. And the current state of knowledge, again, is such that significant harms of parental alienation on children are well documented. Responsibility for that harm is clearly attributable to human agency, both individual and collective. So parental alienation thus fits the accepted definition of child abuse. Of the general types of child abuse, parental alienation is a form of emotional abuse with profound consequences, but it co-occurs with both neglect and with physical and sexual abuse, given that children raised in mother or father absent homes are at significantly higher risk of these forms of abuse. As a form of child abuse with an individual caregiver as its source, parental alienation is a child protection issue, but it's also a form of child maltreatment with collective abuse as its source, and thus parental alienation is an issue that has to be dealt with at a broader structural level, requiring fundamental reform of the family law system. And I'll end there, just leaving you with one final thought, and I think I'm just struck by how much Jennifer and I and everyone we've kind of talked to agrees on this, is this. Given that Iceland has legislated equal pay for women, Iceland is really in an excellent position to implement a second key reform necessary for true gender equality, and also to be a model for countries around the globe, a legal presumption of equal parenting responsibility. This reform is also a form of prevention and intervention that most effectively addresses the scourge of parental alienation. So in addition to being a world leader in gender equality, Iceland has that opportunity to be a leader in combating parental alienation as a form of child abuse. Okay, I'll end there. Thank you.